Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Delegate Corner. I'm your host Sinkas, and I'm joined today by Matt Losquadro. Matt is the communication manager for Synthetix. He's a member of the Synthetix Ambassadors who participate in Optimism governance on behalf of Synthetix, and he's also a member of the Grants Council. Although a bit long, I think our discussion is full of useful insights and very interesting to hear. Let's dive into it. Hey Matt, and welcome to the Delegate Corner. Glad to have you on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me here. It's fantastic to be here with you.
Awesome, nice to hear that. So let's just dive in and learn a little bit more about you. So whenever you feel like it, just take it away.
Yeah, definitely. I am a longtime DeFi guy, longtime crypto guy. Been in the space. Oh my God. I've been, I'll break this down into a couple different sections. So I've been at Synthetix for like 2 years and like 2 months. So like full time in the space for that amount of time. Been involved in DeFi since I like to say like 6 to 8 months before DeFi summer. And now, before DeFi summer, that's before governance tokens, that's before really anything was on chain. Like I always like to say that the coolest thing that we do on chain back then was that we could use Yearn and Curve at the same time in DeFi. Like we thought using these like yield bearing tokens and this automated liquidity pool was like, we thought it was revolutionary, right? Like we thought we were on the cutting edge and we hadn't even seen anything yet. Like that's going back 4 or 5 years ago now. Like it's crazy how much time has passed. And then prior to that, I had been semi involved in like the Bitcoin realm. Like everyone else, you come into the space, you're a bit of a maximalist towards just Bitcoin, and then you slowly started to see, what the technology behind Ethereum and everything could build this like alt layer to the internet, right? And that's where things started to get really, really interesting for me. But like outside of that, um, there's like, my overall involvement in the space and like my entry into the space has been like the most DeFi way to get involved. I did not come in through some like, amazing, hedge fund pipeline or, some communications pipeline from like a big firm or anything like that. I came straight from the community. Was as said, a long time DeFi guy. I had an anonymous Discord account, or like anonymous isn't really the best way to explain it, but it wasn't connected to my real name that you see now. And I pretty much had just been a lurker for years on Twitter, on Discord, and various other places, right? And I got attached to Synthetix in the very early days. I thought the use cases, especially in the low liquidity days of being able to trade from one synth to another, that was like this revolutionary, period for me, right? So I had been involved and I started a Twitter account. I want to say now this probably like 2 years and 5, 6 months ago. And I started it with my real name and I just started tweeting about like all things Synthetix, all things the Synthetix ecosystem. And that pretty much took off. After I want to say like 3, 4 months of doing it, people started to catch on, asked me if I wanted to help out at, communications and marketing at Synthetix, and the rest is history there. But I always like to say that like that is the most DeFi way to get involved in the space, right? Like just a guy on a laptop talking about DeFi, explaining like core subject area where I saw there was this hole of information and just started doing it myself. And then that pushed me into the space. So that's kind of the bit about me. And I always like to say that to people listening, getting involved really is that easy. Find things that you're interested in, find areas where you can be impactful, and then get involved. Just be as involved as you can across the space. And don't give up. Like there's not every opportunity is full time, not every opportunity, is going to last you forever. But just, do as much as you can and get involved where you can.
Mhm. I 100% agree. I can attest to that because that's kind of like similarly how I got into the space back in 2020. I was writing some articles about role and social tokens, and that's how I got involved, and it became my full-time job. So 100% kind of like manifest your involvement in the space through just being active. All right, and you did mention, we've come a long way since DeFi summer, but going back then, like what prompted you to get involved in, like, did you have like a financial background or computer science or anything similar?
Yeah, so my original background was actually in more, business, accounting, finance, things of that nature, right? Had worked at a tax firm for, a bunch of years, interning throughout like, high school and, in uni and things of that nature. So my background doesn't really make sense to push you into the space, right? Because like that isn't the exact archetype for someone that would go into DeFi or crypto. And I will be 100% honest. When I first got involved in the space, it was purely driven by financial interest. Like I saw Bitcoin. Like originally, I was like, oh, this is like a cool asset that I can trade, right? Like buy it here, sell it here. Like that was my involvement. And then when I got to Ethereum, it was very similar because the early days of Ethereum and DeFi, there wasn't a ton that you could do. So I was like, hey, I want to deposit into these lending pools, right? And, earn yield. And that was yet again like this very financial interest. And I think once I saw what Synthetix was doing with like the early days of like yield farming and staking rewards and things of this nature, like that kind of flipped a switch in me. And it's like, wait, we can build out proper incentive programs to nudge people to build out these like super complicated and these super built out systems to build whatever we want, right? Like that was kind of the light bulb moment. And then from there, getting involved across the space and like seeing the benefits of decentralization and the benefits of truly decentralized governance, not like some BS decentralized governance, but like and that was another thing I really liked when it came to Synthetix. Like the early days of Synthetix governance were like voting on Discord polls because we had no other way to do it, right? And then it moved into like electing a representative to serve on different councils, and watching early community members, like people that I would talk to all the time, watching them get elected to like extremely influential and extremely like important and impactful councils was like critical to me. Like this wasn't one token holder just voting on a proposal and it passing and that being the end of it, right? Like this wasn't just one founder voting yes. This was community members who have expertise in various areas being impactful where they can. And even when the founder, like even when Kane disagreed with them, there were points where they would overrule him. And that again was like this light bulb moment in governance. It was like, wait, we don't need to defer to like the original founder for things. Like if you can tell the founder they're wrong and you don't disappear from the protocol, like that's your litmus test. Like that means your decentralized governance is working. If your founder can get pushed back and they're not, they didn't just delete you. so so yeah, that's my that's like the early decentralized governance and such.
Awesome. And typically, like I like to, people that I have on the show, I typically like to ask them what is the thing that makes them tick in crypto, other side, other than governance. But I think it's pretty apparent that I would say DeFi is your thing if I had to take a guess. So I'm going to make it a bit more harder and say, other than DeFi and governance, what is something that you think is exciting? Like, and not just, you can remove your Synthetix hat if you wish, and just out of like personal interest or personal curiosity, something that you might double with in a weekend or in your free time, in the space.
It's a tough question. I'll give it to you, but I will say that outside of DeFi, I think some of the social fi side of things is extremely interesting. Like I've been messing around on, Farcaster with Warpcast and bounties, and the experience over there has been fantastic. Like I love being on Farcaster much more than I like being on Twitter. Like I feel like the overall discourse and the overall conversations, like it feels like much more of this like smaller DeFi community that doesn't want to like come for your head, which is helpful. It's like it's nice. And like I put out a bounty request over the weekend, giving people like 10 USDC for like various things. And like 15, 20 people just come in and are contributing. And like that's this super important part of the space, this like overall discourse side, and especially built out on decentralized tech. Um, I will go a step further and say that I think the SocialFi side of crypto has done really good at onboarding users, and I think that's been a struggle across the rest of crypto. Like being able to sign in with like your email, or being able to sign in with your Google account, or things of that nature, right? Secure with 2FA and all this stuff. Like it obviously it's not like the ideal angle from like this maximalist decentralized side, right? And like self custody and storing your 25 word seed phrase in your head. But like there's a lot of good that comes out of watching what these other areas do, right? Because like SocialFi isn't attempting to onboard these like super decentralized maximalist folks. They're trying to onboard as many people as possible and to bootstrap their social system, whether it's a friend tech, whether it's Farcaster, whether it's Lens, any of these, right? So being able to watch them and being able to see what they're doing and see how DeFi can emulate it in some way, like that has also pushed me into different realms. Thank God you didn't have an NFT question, because I'm really bad at the NFT stuff.
Uh,
So just
yeah,
a thank you for that.
absolutely. To each his own. I mean, I've played around different parts of the space as well. I love Farcaster as well. I've experimented a little bit with it, and I think it's very interesting. My only pain point is that it's like Rapcaster is mobile only, and as soon as like there's like a desktop version, I'm all for it. uh,
They do have a a desktop version once you sign up on mobile.
okay, okay, that's interesting.
So once you sign up on mobile, you're good. But I was talking to someone yesterday who's involved in Optimism governance, and he said the same thing. He was like, I just don't want to download the app. Like I don't like having all these apps.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a similar point of criticism that that they'll take.
All right, awesome. Then I'll explore right after our episode here. All right, and moving on. I mean, we've come, as I mentioned earlier, we've come a long way since DeFi summer, and just being able to do Yearn and Curve, and there's a bunch of different protocols out there. There's a bunch of different chains. There are a bunch of different L2s. So my question to you is, what brought you to Optimism specifically, and how or why did you choose to become involved with its governance, either as Matt or as like as Synthetix?
Yeah, definitely. So the push over to Optimism is really driven by this nature of, in like the early days of DeFi summer, whenever once the chain started to get extremely congested, doing anything on chain priced me out of using Ethereum, right? Like paying $30 to claim $10 in rewards has never been the best financial decision. There were times that I did it just because I was so gung ho on using Ethereum. Um, but the push over to Optimism it's really a couple things, right? Like I was priced out of using Ethereum, right? And finding an alternative with the same, or at least same pathway to the same security guarantees was like very critical for me. So that pushes, me over to Optimism. And Optimism was like really the first L2 that I was able to interact with, right? Like the context here is that even before other users were using, Optimism and on it, like before it was EVM equivalent, it was EVM compatible, but it wasn't EVM equivalent forever. Like Synthetix had started onboarding users there out of necessity, right? Because Synthetix has like, at least it used to, it had like this weekly claiming requirement. So with that, if you were doing a weekly claim and it's only for a week's worth of rewards, it doesn't make sense to do it on Ethereum mainnet. But when you do it on Optimism, that's you're paying pennies. And that was the first protocol that was built on Optimism. So yeah, that to answer your question, like it was really pushed over by this initial need to be there, but then that need pushes into this another light bulb moment of like, wait, look at the sorts of products that can be built on top of Optimism. And it's much more wide ranging than what can be built on Ethereum mainnet. And something that, Synthetix has noted, something that other, like many projects across Optimism have noticed, right? Like we can build innovative financial dApps or, SocialFi or things of this nature on top of this system that has low gas fees and can onboard retail users and has the same security guarantees and and so on and so forth. Now, my jump into Optimism governance, that's more of an interesting one, right? So I think my first real jump into Optimism governance is actually the phase zero Optimism distribution, right? Because by that point, I had already been elected to be a Synthetix Ambassador. And for people that don't know, the Synthetix Ambassadors are a council within the Synthetix DAO, and they're elected to represent Synthetix's interest, in various DeFi governance, right? So there needed to be a proposal to actually distribute those tokens, and that was the initial involvement, right? Like, draft a proposal to use those tokens, and then present them to Synthetix governance, and then take that and then bring it over to Optimism governance. And then from there, it's really a mix, right? Because it's like, hey, the largest protocols and the largest builders, with the largest economic impact and things of this nature, should be extremely involved on the chain that they're building on. But the other side of it is like, hey, I got involved out of genuine want and need to shape Optimism in its early days, right? Because now that you have all these tokens that you want to distribute and bootstrap, the growth of the chain, now you've got to turn it into something that actually has some process and, proper voices behind it. In the early days of Optimism, even with my involvement, I'm going to talk about myself like I was this, that I was the savior. I wasn't. The early days of Optimism governance were rough. Like the committee system, this committee system where we had these like weird, like, you didn't have any real power, but you like issued recommendations. It didn't work, like, and then you had token holders still voting on individual proposals. So there was a lot of proposals that, let's just say, you shouldn't have gotten, number one, rewarded, or number two, received that amount of tokens. But like my involvement in Optimism governance has been, really helpful for both myself and for pushing governance in the right direction, right? And there's been so many other folks that that we can talk about later, but bringing Optimism from this phase zero distribution that was also frowned upon by some people because it's just the foundation picking out the amount of OP. And then you go into committees, which has its problems. And now we've reached a real point with the grants council system and mission request, merge public goods funding and such, where I think we're really at a good point. But yeah, to make sure I answered your question, my initial involvement is really driven by this phase zero distribution. And then from there, it's like, let's make sure Optimism is the best place to build on, because this is where, Synthetix is, this is where I am, this is where I see the future of Ethereum being, because regular users can't onboard to Ethereum L1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely covered my question to a great extent. So, all right, so you act as a delegate, both like mostly on behalf of Synthetix, but also as like an individual, from what we said prior to starting the recording. So, could you describe, like in a nutshell, what do you think is the hardest thing about being a delegate, both like as an individual and also as a representative of another entity?
I would say the hardest thing is the sheer amount of information that comes through with being a delegate, right? And like, I would go a step further and say like being a delegate and then also, being involved in public goods funding, then also being involved in, the grants council, right? And I think that's true of many of the delegates you've talked to. I would say like the top, call it the top 30 or 50 delegates are probably the ones that are like most involved in day-to-day Optimism governance. And the real thing is that there's just so much information to take in. There's so many changes from the foundation. There's so many proposals. There's so many mission requests. There's just so much of everything that you want to make sure that everything is looked at, but you just do not have the capacity to do everything yourself. And you have to really be comfortable sharing the workload with the rest of the delegates and knowing and hoping that these things will turn out good. Like if there's something really egregious, hop in and, and provide your feedback and try to help out. But you really have to split work between delegates. And, that's something that Optimism governance and like really the Optimism community has done really well, with, hey, let's raise our hands and, we'll look at, X mission request. And then other delegates will look at these mission requests. And at least you have some separation of duties, because without that, every delegate is expected to look at everything. And that may be impossible. Like that's possible for the voting stages of things. Like I'm happy to do that. But when it's the initial feedback stages and you have, I think we're at like 65, 70 mission proposals, like that's a lot of mission proposals. And then Rush Public Goods funding, you have 400 plus of those. Like then the grants, like there's just a lot to keep up with. And it's the sheer amount of information that will overload a normal delegate who, because like some of these delegates may just, they may just burn out because they're just super, super involved and they're just like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
So if you're a delegate listening to this, make sure to, separate your time wisely, know that you can't respond to everything, and, take in as much information as you can. You do not need to do everything. You will end up in a bad spot. So don't do that to yourself.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think you're definitely not the first person I heard on the podcast that has mentioned that as being one of the biggest issues a delegate has to face when participating in governance. But yeah, I personally 100% agree, and I can attest to that simply because that's the problem that basically gave birth to my job. Like what I do is like I just have to be on top of everything, and it is a full-time job just being aware of all the changes. And even that, like even when I dedicate my 8 hours of working hours, which is typically more than that, but let's just say the 8 hours, then I also out of just personal interest I might spend another 4 or 5 hours on the same things, and I still don't get everything because there's just so much things, like so many things happening, and especially if you break it down into multiple different programs, then that's a hell different other story.
Yeah, yeah. You look back on the early days of DeFi and like you yearn for it, right? Like this ability to like scroll on Twitter for 5 minutes and go through three Telegram channels and know everything. But it's also like without the sheer amount of information, like this is a good problem to have.
Mhm.
And I will 100% agree with you. When we say that we work, full-time days, like these 8-hour days and things of this nature, we all do a lot more because a lot of us, me and you included, turned a personal passion into full-time work. So instead of scrolling somewhere else, I'm scrolling on Twitter. Like I am always reading something relating to crypto. Whether that's good for me or not, who knows? We'll find out at some point. But I am always reading, crypto related information. Um, so it's like as close to 24/7 involvement as you can,
Mhm. Yeah,
you
100%.
know.
Shout out to all the people, spending Saturday evening reading Vitalik's papers instead of going out.
Yeah,
Uh,
shout out to our Discord and Twitter addiction. Yeah, shout out to that.
all right, going back to being a delegate, um, I like asking people what they think from a cultural perspective or from a values perspective are some things that are necessary for a delegate to have. But then also from like a practical standpoint, what are some practices or some even like character traits that one can have in order to be a, quote unquote, good delegate?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I think when it comes to the character traits that a delegate should exhibit, I always like to say that you have to be extremely open-minded. You have to be very malleable to, changes from either the foundation or regular governance things or things of that nature, right? Like without the ability to be open-minded, you're stuck in this weird spot where you're only taking your subject matter, expertise area, and that's the only area that you're happy to contribute on. Now, it's always possible to fall into that, right? Like as you know, and as we've talked about, like I am super DeFi focused. So that does shape the involvement that I'm comfortable giving. But you can't just limit yourself to one area of involvement because you might just leave yourself, in the dust as you don't know what's going on, in the rest of, these proposals and, like the modern day state of the things that you're outside of. Now, when it comes to like general culture and like general thoughts on some of the decentralized governance, side of things. I mean, I think you have to be like this self-starter style of a person, right? Like you can't come into this and just kind of raise your hand and like get your marching orders. Because it's not how any of this works. Like you need to just kind of dive into the forums, jump into areas where you think deserve feedback or where your feedback can be, extremely helpful, and just drop your thoughts in. Even if you don't think your thoughts are perfect on the matter, like just get them out there, because there's always something that people can pull out of what you say, even if it's bullet points, whatever, where you can help someone else form another opinion and like improve a proposal. And I would also say, and this is probably my last thoughts on it, is like a general cultural thing when people are reviewing different proposals, whether it's, mission requests, grants council proposals, direct public goods funding, even general thoughts and general feedback threads. You should always go into these things with the thought of how are we going to take this proposal from a no into a yes. You should never come in and just say like, let's go scorched earth. This isn't getting any further than here. I mean, hey, there are reasons to do that. There are extreme grifters that deserve that treatment. But for most people, they do not want to, scam the system. Most people just come out with a proposal and they think it's good, but you're the full-time delegate, or part-time delegate. Like you probably know the system better than they do. So just work with them, be kind, like be a little bit slow with people, kind of let them ease into these systems, right? Because we've been doing this for years now. And optimism governance is extremely complicated, as with any governance system. And you just kind of, if you want to get to the impactful folks, the builders and the people that are going to onboard people, you're going to work with a lot of people that are very new to whatever governance system you're involved in. A lot of DeFi protocols are not going to have full-time governance people. They're going to have someone from BD, coming in and trying to work in a proposal, and you just be kind to them, just work with them, try to get them to a point where their proposal can be a yes. And it definitely won't check all the boxes that they or you are happy with to 100% extent, but it's fine, even if they are to receive a smaller grant or a smaller allocation, or tougher to hit milestones. I think all of that is critical because this is new to all of us. Mm-hmm. Like the idea of decentralized governance is new. We can't expect the world out of people.
Yes, I think it's very important to try and turn criticism into constructive feedback for any new participants. And yeah, props to you for bringing it up. And I think it's very valuable if we can get all delegates to kind of like think through this lens before kind of like writing feedback to the proposal. All right, so I want to kind of like be mindful of our time and kind of like speed through, but then at the same time, have enough time to go through things properly. So continuing on, when you make a decision as a delegate, either through Synthetix or on a personal level, do you have like a set framework you try to follow? Do you make it like ad hoc based on the merits of each proposal? How do you go about like decision making?
Yeah, so I would say when it comes to the Synthetix delegate side of things, the framework is always, let's try to find rough consensus on this subject area, right? Like as our council of 5 Synthetix ambassadors. Now, typically that is very reminiscent of the early days of governance at Synthetix, where we're voting via Discord polls and some quick comments amongst us all. Now, there isn't like this real set framework here, right? Like the overall goal is like, is this impactful to optimism, and is it like as optimal as it can be? Like whatever proposal this may be, whether it's it could be mission requests that maybe they're impactful to optimism, but maybe they're not super optimal. Like maybe it's like it will be impactful, but the use of tokens is way too high, or the milestones aren't good enough, or things of that nature, right? So the framework is still kind of ad hoc to an extent, because it's we're individuals that change. This is a council that's elected every 4 months. So your processes are very discretionary to a degree. But I think that's a good thing, right? Like having this diverse opinion that changes on things and works out differences is helpful. Now, that is how we would work out a vote. When it comes to like my own comments or my own post on the forums, like those are always myself. They're not, they're not like SNX ambassadors branded delegate opinion. So things like that are again my own discretionary thoughts on things. But the overall goal here for me as a delegate is number one to like bootstrap the network, get builders excited, get builders building on it, build out innovative DeFi protocols. That's really where my focus is. And the second thing is like build out sustainable incentive programs that people do not need to keep coming back to. Like when you come back for your second, your third, your whatever grant, it should always get smaller with time, and there should always be a path to you giving users the same experience that they've been given in an incentivized nature without incentives. Like you should be working on a path to slashing your fees. Maybe it's a tech improvement, maybe it's things of that nature. And that's always been my focus area since like the early days of grants.
Mhm. Awesome to hear that. And taking a step back and seeing kind of like the broader Optimus Collective and the like governance mechanism of the collective, could you like on a high level just give us a few bullet points on where do you think we are like strong, where do you think we're lacking, where do you think we could experiment more in Optimism governance?
Yeah, definitely. I think the overall experiment around trialing two houses of governance is is extremely beneficial and hasn't been tried before. Like a lot of governance in the past has just been direct token holder voting, and that leads to this kind of whale control of this system, right? So building out this token house and the citizen house, I find extremely beneficial. Now, given there are obvious flaws, with having these badge holders distribute large amounts of grant rich public goods funding, and it potentially not be the most optimal solution. I've kind of beat the dead horse on it, but I do think that with the Citizens House, there is going to have to be a little bit more work put into like overall filtering and incentive alignment of proposals that like get in front of them, right? Because like even if you have 250 people or 200 plus people, it's hard to filter through that many proposals and determine what's impactful and what's not and things of that nature. But to me, splitting out those two systems, fantastic. On the token house side, having this grants council system. Now you have the grants council, you have, under that, you have the milestones and metrics committee, which is a very welcome development because tracking milestones and metrics has been very hard, and it's critical to the grants process. And then having these builders and grants, like those processes have been great. Now, hey, there are always some improvements that I would like to see, but overall, the jump from where we were at with the committee system, or even before it, it has been leaps and bounds better. And I think those processes are improving every day. So overall, like I think what Optimism does really well as well is that they're very open to experimentation, right? There's every couple months, when the season ends and people are giving out feedback, the involvement from the foundation and from delegates and from others, especially like Justine over at the foundation, like she is critical and she is making sure that feedback is heard, sending out, like a post on feedback and pretty much telling you that they've heard it and this is their thoughts on it. That's really important to governance, and it's something that Optimism is probably alone in that they do it really well compared to others.
Mm-hmm. All right. And in the future, like looking forward, 1, 2, or 3 years in the future, I know it's gonna be very hard, but I want you to try and condense it in like 3 sentences. Where do you want to see the OP collective be?
I think the OP collective needs to work on a solution to properly incentivize super chain, like the overall super chain narrative. And then also more of a tech side, but build out a proper way to communicate between these chains. Um, I think that area is going to be the most important area, as that's the big narrative around optimism, right? This the super chain side. You have base, you have the biggest publicly traded, U.S. company has built out their own chain on top of optimism. Now we should figure out how to properly incentivize them. I personally think we should trial using the grants council to work on proposals and mission requests and so on for base directly. Even if it's an experimental, 5 to 10 million OP, and we just work through proposals and see how that goes. Because I think we have a real opportunity with base. We have a real opportunity to grow the super chain with this like bully pulpit that Coinbase holds. So yeah, that's my condensed answer, and I know I didn't follow the 2 sentence rule.
No,
It's okay.
yeah, it was extremely difficult to begin with, so I think you did a very good job like condensing it. So yeah, and a very interesting take. I would agree. All right, and going for a quick appreciation round, if you will, before we wrap things up, I want you to show us a delegate who you think hasn't received as much voting power or love, as I like to call that, even though like they are doing really well to contributing to OP.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm actually going to go with two.
Great.
So, I am going to call out number one, Michael, or blockchain guy, or the blockchain guy. I know he cycled between some names. I think his overall involvement in the Optimism Collective is extremely helpful. Having these community calls, keeping people up on what's going on. These are things that aren't always done well, and his involvement across many streams is very, very, very helpful. So that's one person to call out. I think he's got a significant amount of OP voting power, but I think even past the voting power, his involvement is pretty much full time, right? Like he's probably full time optimism, and involved across various areas and has to keep up like 24/7. I will also say Jack from Velodrome. I know that he probably has his detractors out there watching this video to some extent, but he is an extremely beneficial delegate to optimism. He has a very direct way of placing his feedback and making sure that proposals are the best that they can be. And there's also this next part of it where he's one of the few delegates that will go through proposals after the fact and write up these like impact reports saying like, hey, like where did the OP go? And like that's something that I think we have to work out on like a better cadence. Like it shouldn't be volunteers telling me where the OP went. Like we should have a better way of doing that. But Jack has done a lot of good on that side of things, and he's rooted out a lot of grifters and a lot of other folks within the space. Obviously, there's many others that I'd like to call out in terms of appreciation. All the folks that I work with on the Grants Council, they are fantastic. I will call out Paper Imperium here because he called me out in one of his and said that I have a very direct way of responding to feedback or placing my feedback with proposals. That'll be my clickbait way of making him watch this. He'll have some really good dad joke to respond with to me here. But yeah, I mean everyone from the Grants Council, and there's many badge holders that I'd like to appreciate as well. I won't name everyone because it would go on forever, but overall, the folks on grants, the folks, some of the badge holders, and even the general people that are involved on the forums. Like there are so many people that do so much for the collective and probably aren't being properly incentivized to do it, but they just do it for the greater good of optimism and the greater good for the ecosystem. And we just need to keep building out a culture that people are rewarded for that impact. and are continued to be, brought into the ecosystem.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah, quite an extensive list of, of people you wanted to give a shout out to, and I agree that they are all deserving. Um, and is there a particular delegate that you'd like to see or listen to on the podcast next?
Yes, I don't know if you've had Dane on the podcast.
I have
The
actually.
You have had Dane.
No, I
You should have
haven't.
Dane on again. Oh, you haven't? Okay, perfect. I was going to say you should have him on again. You see how gung ho I was on that one? Yeah, I think you should have Dane on. I think Dane's overall area of expertise is really helpful. Like, for some context here, Dane jumped into supporting the Grants Council and being the council lead from the very beginning, right? And he has been the probably the this in the shadows hero of building out the proper processes and the proper rubrics and all this other really critical stuff that you just see appear. Dane is actually helping out from the background while not voting on proposals, but making sure that everyone else is as involved as they should be. Like making sure that the grants council is meeting their deadlines and responding to feedback on time. Like Dane has been doing all of that in the background for a while. I mean, yes, he does have a public presence to some degree, but like I don't feel like his involvement has been properly looked at. And I think his involvement would be a really interesting one to hear from. Maybe not like super as a delegate, but it would also help with like, himself like interfacing with the foundation to some degree, because he's like the conduit to some extent for a lot of that. And then just building out this decentralized, governance system from the beginning. Like that's really what Dane has helped to do.
Yeah.
So I think he would be a really helpful person to have on.
Yeah, I think it would make for a very interesting discussion. So yeah, I'll try my best to get him on here. Open invitation to him if he hears this, but I'll also personally reach out to him. All right, and to wrap things up, what are some places that one could learn a little bit more about you, about Synthetix, or the ambassador program, how they could come in touch with you if they needed to? Feel free to kind of like shill a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So my Twitter account, that's where 99% of my takes will be. So jump on there. It's just my full name, Matt Losquadro. So, definitely follow me on there, DM me, join the Synthetix Discord. Even if you're not interested in Synthetix, there is a home for everybody. There are various channels where people are there and they don't like Synthetix too, so it's okay. So hey, join the Discord, join in on the overall discussion. If you want to learn about the ambassadors, I would join the Discord, follow the SNX Ambassadors Twitter account. Yeah, and just watch out for overall updates from myself, from Synthetix, from the ambassadors, and on the Synthetix Discord. Um, that's that's really what I would say on that. Sometimes I do some like various personal writing, mostly Synthetix related, but we'll see. I really should expand out of some of that writing. So, I have a little newsletter that's on my Twitter as well, so you can take a look at that. And yeah, just feel free to DM, reach out. I'll respond to pretty much anyone, um, because I'm just happy to chat. So, yeah, if anyone on here wants to chat about decentralized governance or DeFi or SocialFi, anything, just feel free to reach out. Happy to talk.
All right, and I'll make sure to include the links in the description of the video and on Spotify so anybody can find them quickly. All right, and that brings us to the end of the episode. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I really enjoyed our conversation. And even though we went a little bit over time, I usually have a hard time kind of like cutting them short just because I find the conversation so interesting. And I guess so would other people. So yeah, thank you a lot for being on the show and for sharing your insights.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to listen to the next one, hopefully with Dane in it. But again, thank you for having me on here. Thanks for folks that are listening, and you have a good one.
You too. And thanks everybody else for tuning in.